Hi, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, great. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2025 Bedri Distinguished Writers Series lecture. The Bedri Distinguished Writers Series was created to provide funds for the Department of English to bring major contemporary writers working in narrative fiction or creative nonfiction to the Berkeley campus annually for a day or two. The series has two primary goals. One, to stir excitement and conversation in the Department of English, and two, to give all Berkeley students, alum, and the community the opportunity to attend a lecture. Previous Bedri Distinguished Writers include Viet Thanh Nguyen, Jennifer Egan, Edwidge Danticat, Valeria Lucelli, and last year, Cristina Rivera Garza. Before I introduce Joy Williams, this year's Bedri Distinguished Writer, I'd like to say thank you first to John Bedri, who has endowed the funds for this series and was the vision behind them and has been such a generous supporter of the English department and of writing at Berkeley. So please join me in giving John a hand. I'd also like to thank Grace de Guzman, Dana Swenson, who is back there, and Jo Marie Cedro, who coordinated all of the logistics for the visit, and without whom none of this would be happening. So thank you so much to Grace, Dana, and Jo Marie, and thank you all for being here. Thank you most of all to Joy Williams, who we are thrilled and honored to host in the Berkeley English Department this year. Joy Williams is one of the most influential and distinguished American writers of the last half-century. A master of the short story form, Williams has published 6 collections of short fiction, the most recent of which is titled Concerning the Future of Souls, which was published last year. 5 novels, most recently Harrow from 2021, and a bracing and brilliant collection of essays entitled Ill Nature, Rants and Reflections on Humanity and Other Animals. She's also written a guide, or co-written a guide, to the Florida Keys back in the day. She's been nominated for a National Book Award, has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, has won the Rea Award, the Kirkus Award for Fiction, and the Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. Over the past 6 weeks or so, a group of graduate students, undergraduates, and me have been meeting weekly to read and talk about Joy's work. We first read a number of stories in her marvelous collected volume, which is titled The Visiting Privilege, New and Collected Stories, published in 2016. And then over the past couple of weeks, we read her most recent novel, Harrow. And this is a good time to note that there are books available for purchase in the back, thanks to Pegasus Books. And thank you, as always, Pegasus, for making that happen. We really appreciate it. So please do, after the talk, buy a book. I'm guessing Joy will be happy to sign it, and we'll go from there. And so many of the folks or a number of the folks who took part in the reading group are here today. And I just want to take a second, and describe our experience a little bit. We found ourselves, some of us had read some of Joy Williams's work before, some of us read none, some of us had read all of it. And so we all just kind of started in. And we found ourselves, mesmerized and troubled and perplexed and fascinated by this really incredible work. And I'm just speaking for myself here, not like the collective conclusion of the group. Williams's fiction always sort of tugs one out of alignment. The world of her stories resembles the worlds as it seems to work, but refracted through some sort of strange glass. Characters are both familiar and inscrutable, settings welcome and wrench readers at once. Plots seem to move along paths that are systematically uncanny, and then sometimes along no path at all. In our reading group, we spent a lot of time thinking about what kind of story or novel we were reading, and what it would mean to read it that way. For instance, Harrow, her most recent novel, is, according to the back cover, set in, quote, an uncertain landscape after an environmental apocalypse, and features what the novel describes, and this is a quote from the novel itself, what the novel describes as a gabby, seditious lot, in the worst of health, but with kamikaze hearts, an army of the aged and ill, determined to refresh, through crackpot violence, a plundered earth. So, if one were to say that Harrow is a sardonic, gimlet-eyed, arch tale of ecological disaster and the fruitless attempts of a small group of elders to make people realize the scope of the damage that we've wrought, then one wouldn't be wrong. But that description is also wildly not right, or at least wildly insufficient. If one dives into the book on the book jacket's terms, one is quickly flummoxed and then enthralled by the scope of what one encounters. Not an easily categorizable story of disaster and dystopia, but a skeptical meditation on the power and limits of stories and art, the strange precarity of whatever it is that we might call the normal, the unthinkable strangeness of everyday life in the world's aftermath, the inhumanity that shapes human life in the world and the wonder of death, the pervasive though elliptical systems in which we live. The world of Harrow is a deeply harrowing world, but it is also a world in which Disney and In-N-Out Burger still exist. And somehow, in Williams's hands, those two details become the strangest part of the book. The story that hooked me, just to finally sort of sum up, the story that hooked me onto Joy Williams's work is a short, relatively recent text called Souvenir. It's a 3-page story set in Cornwall, a bunch of tourists in Cornwall. It wasn't the first Joy Williams story that I read, but it was the first one that floored me absolutely, and that made me want to read everything again. The first one that astonished me kind of from the get-go. And so I just, as a place to start, one could do worse than Souvenir in the visiting privilege. Finally, this is the final year in my term as department chair. It's an interesting and vexing job that has me reading constantly, but in an instrumental sort of way. I don't really have the luxury to kind of linger over 13-paragraph emails about shifts in computer security protocols, and I don't really have the time to kind of, luxuriate in the finer details of a 190-page report on the future of doctoral education at the University of California. I've just got to read the damn thing and get on to the next one. And it can make one into a bad kind of reader, for whom the only page that matters is the next page, since that means you're one page closer to being done. Reading Williams's work over the past few months, in these quite bad times that we're in, has helped me to figure out how to read good again. Slowly, without designs on the text, negatively capable, allowing myself to linger for way too long over the moments of simply marvelous prose. So, Joy, from me, thank you. Please join me in welcoming Joy Williams.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm so happy to be here. I thought I'd read a few little sections from Concerning the Future of Souls. If that's all right with you, or are you just waiting for a lecture? No. Okay. I feel more comfortable. Thank you, reading from some of my stories. But for those of you not familiar with this book, it's 99 extremely short stories. The titles of each are at the end. And at the end of the story, too, it explains, the title may explain what was going on in the former piece or not. It's supposed to invite you to think further and in different directions. But basically, the figures in the story are the devil and Azrael, who is the angel that takes the souls and delivers them to, we know not exactly where, and this is not explained in the book. But there are many other figures that appear in these pages. So let me just read a few of these. And this is explaining Azrael. He had 4,000 wings. This was simply a fact. The feathers of each wing innumerable, as they should be. The wings sheltered the souls so they could not be viewed in transit. This too was correct. He also had 1,000 eyes, but not, as has been rumored, 4 heads. Azrael was spectacularly made and looked nothing like Jesus, as was so tirelessly depicted though in truth the Nazarene was not at all as rendered either. Jesus and Azrael were not well acquainted. They traveled in different circles. Jesus was surprisingly unfamiliar with death other than his own. The birds of the air were terrified of Azrael. His murmurs of assurance were incomprehensible to them. Their bones were hollow and filled with air, the sweetest air. Wasn't that enough? Now this is called In Lovely Blue, Around Which Lies Most Loving Blue. And that's a quote from Holderlin. The devil was once called Son of the Morning. He was the morning star. Now he was a sop, a concession, an afterthought. But this was just the inner voice talking, the still small voice, that little piece of God caught inside him like a fishbone, trying to make him feel bad. This was just God, who hadn't gotten over him and never would. He threw him out of heaven so he could reside on earth. What kind of reasoning was that? God had let jealousy overcome him. Pique, he must have blanked out. And in the devil's estimation, he had never blanked on again. He had doubled down in the loving the little human children department at the expense of everything else. It was all so credulous and sentimental, and people just lapped it up. Such love could not be over-justified. The situation was unsustainable. The devil clawed a bit at the sight of the lodged fishbone, which was hardly a torment but more than an irritation. His heart beat on, unperturbed. He had a good, strong heart still, one that had never given him any trouble. That's called Morning Star. They do know that their souls don't belong to them anymore after they die, right? The souls become impersonal, non-individual. They do know that's the deal, right? Everything's different. They're prepared for that, I believe. Prepared for everything being different. I doubt it, the devil said. But let's just think about this for a moment. Souls are non-particular, but they're awaiting the resurrection of the body from which they've been expelled. Their condition is not one of waiting. The soul's afterlife is assured, but it's not a personal afterlife. It's not connected to life. I'm not wise enough to explain. You're not meant to explain. No, you're meant for something else. I don't believe this re-birthday surprise has been thoroughly thought through. May I have a drink? Why, certainly, the devil exclaimed. What shall we have? A milkshake, Azrael said. A milkshake? I don't want anything. I just wish you wouldn't hound me like this. I wish you'd be distracted. You know what crows wish for, I assume? The devil said playfully, easing up. Yes, negredo. That's what they are, primogenial. Yes, crows are marvelous, crows and ravens. Azrael was glad he and his difficult friend could agree on something. Same genus, like spirit and soul, the devil concluded with satisfaction. And the title of that is The Crow Wishes Everything Was Black. The oceans were being desalinized so people could be clean and have ice and grow food and poppies and drink it as well. They needed fresh water and didn't have it anymore. The oceans were vast. They covered 70% of the planet. The thinking went first eradication, then development. The argument would be nothing lives there anymore. There was more plastic in the ocean than fish. Some of Azrael's eyes were closed. Fewer than 100, but still worrisome. They were not encrusted or inflamed, just shut, firmly shut. Was it rebellion? He didn't know how to talk to his eyes. He lapped the shut ones a little with a tongue. Nothing but a slight salt taste. Had they been weeping? He had taken the souls of octopi and sharks, great fishes and rays and turtles, even the glittering lowly ones, the little ones. Such transport was not believed, but it was true. They too were permitted to wait in the hidden retreat, but unlike humankind, they would fear no further judgment. It's called Salt. Rilke once referred to his penis, the poet's penis, as a womb-dazzling rocket. The angels weren't indifferent to him, the devil thought. They just didn't like him. And the title of this is, Who, If I Cried, Would Hear Me Among the Angelic Orders? The devil had little to occupy his time, which had become less and less valuable. Everything he stood for was running along on its own, requiring very little involvement on his part. He had his snakes to care for, but the truth was they didn't want his care. His association with them had made their lives extremely difficult. They were feared and harassed, incessantly murdered, even though their existence underground kept the earth from falling apart, something people once knew but didn't anymore. Snakes were so interesting and tragic, dethroned kings. He really admired them, but they wanted nothing to do with him. He had quite inadvertently betrayed them, and that's called hibernaculum. The Yaqui, an indigenous tribe of the state of Sonora in Mexico and southwestern Arizona, have access to many worlds. These overlapping worlds, Anium, are the worlds of animals, night, dreams, people, flowers, death. There are many others. The complex mythology of the Yaquis is most beautifully rendered in the deer dance. The deer comes from Yo Anya, the enchanted world, enters the Hayo Anya, the wilderness world, and dances in the sea Anya, the flower world. The ritual of the dance weaves the worlds and eliminates the evil done by man. It can also be quite the burlesque. It is performed on special days and during Pascua, Easter. An old story of the Yaquis, and one that can be told, concerns two hunters walking in the desert with powerful rifles. They saw a small deer in the distance, looking at them curiously. One of them shot the deer, which fell, mortally wounded. But immediately the animal rose, shook off the dirt, and regarded them as before. The deer was shot and struck again, and once more, after thrashing about in the dirt, rose intact in the same spot and gazed at them. For the third time, the little deer, the suelta, was shot and collapsed in an enormous cloud of dust. When this cleared, the deer was standing, watching them. It then disappeared. The men finally realized, or were later informed, that the deer came from the Yo Anya and wanted to offer them wisdom, but that they had refused to accept it. When the Yaquis were first introduced to Christianity, they found that story stupefying and did not think it brought good news. It's called news. He'd been diagnosed with a cancer that was metastasizing rapidly. He was 15 years of age, and naturally he was pissed. As his disease progressed, his parents disgusted him more and more. He couldn't help it. They were broken to him, his mother especially, who wept continuously. He told them he wanted a Firebird for his birthday, a first-generation Pontiac Firebird. They found one for him quickly, and it was delivered on a flatbed. It had been lovingly restored. The color was blizzard pearl, radical. His father was too anxious to give him driving lessons, so an instructor was hired. He was of the know where your vehicle is in space and place at all times school, the bump the cones school. You practice with the cones, trying to bump them at first over and over as you're backing up or pulling ahead until you can't. You couldn't hit them if you tried. It would be offensive to your new knowledge of space and place. The cones taught him a lot, he felt, maybe everything he needed to know. That's called striking style. He peered into the freezer. There should be one last portion of integrity-raised beef in there. There were many people, most of them in fact, who didn't care much about the integrity of their food overmuch, but he was not one of them. but there was nothing. No remnant of frolicsome calf raised to prime by loving kindergartners, petted 100 times a day by tiny hands, fed flowers and clover, surrounded by her most loyal and affectionate and trusted caregivers, the ones who had named her and taught her to know that name was hers. No tunnel of death, no blood-slick and reeking duckboards, no inept stickers or angry leggers, no prodders or stunners, no knocking gun going ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. Just a last embrace in a lush and sunny field, and the sound of little children's piping voices, not a whiff of terror or foreboding in the air for her. But the last of Hemera, raised by Mrs. Ricky Hormel's advanced preschool class of Hopewell, New Jersey, was not in the freezer. He must have finished it off some time ago and just forgotten. It's called Hemera. One of the most important philosopher theologians of Western Europe in the High Middle Ages was the Franciscan John Duns Scotus. He wrote on grammar, logic, and metaphysics, and was praised for the nuance and complexity of his thoughts. Two of his most dazzling and beautiful concepts concern hexicity and the university of being. Hexicity is the thinness of everything, that quality in which all is individualizing, particular. The university of being is the argument that we are all one in the oneness of God. All life, water, trees, animals, participate in the same being, and that being is holy. Certain renditions of Scotus shows him wearing a snug, vaguely conical hat, and it might be more than legend that he believed this assisted in the retention of metaphysical wisdom. His Franciscan followers, the Dunsmen, wore headgear that somewhat exaggerated the conical shape. By the 16th century, the ideas of Renaissance humanism prevailed in European thought, with its emphasis on the self and the centrality of the human in the cosmos. The philosophy of Scotus was mocked. Duns, the simple village of his birth in Scotland, became a word of scorn, and dunce a contemptuous term for someone dabbling in sophistry and incapable of true scholarship. The Dunsman's telltale hats were depicted by the enemies of Scotus' thought as more and more preposterous and elongated, a witch or wizard's adornment. It was considered quite the opportunity for mirth, the ideas of university. It's called dunce. And then the last one I'd like to read. Every once in a while, a soul would shriek as though she hadn't forgotten she'd just experienced death and was reliving it, as it were. This occurred when Azrael and death appeared simultaneously, which was as rare as it was undesirable. Death had innumerable wardrobes and guises, Azrael suspected, but whenever he encountered the great Thanatos, death appeared as lichen. When he confided this to the devil considered it not particularly peculiar. Lichens are mysteriously complex. They come in peace and are theoretically immortal. I find it absolutely marvelous that you see death as lichen, the devil said, laughing. It really is so you. That's lichen. Thanks. And now I'll read a short piece. It's got a nice title, Eric told me. It's a nice title. Literature and the Dawn State. I gave a little talk once to a small group of people about the importance of fiction. It was a brave little song about the necessity of great commanding and demanding works to confront our idiocy and heal the ravaged world we've wrought. I maintained that fiction had large powers, still unrealized, but that it had sunk into woozy glut and play, into wallows of self and sharing, I really worked myself up for a few moments about the importance of art, fiction's art, and its uncanny and unmessaged transformative power, its ability to deepen consciousness and perception, its daring and integrity to acknowledge the holy, to seek it without shame. I even offered a modest list of what fiction should require of itself, its responsibilities and aims. 1. Fiction should avoid the false assurances of narrative. Government, corporations, death technologies, and media now own, shape, and manipulate the myth of the arc, of progress, of resolution. These myths are no longer the wellsprings of fiction. 2. Fiction is not entertainment. 3. Satire has become ineffective. The subjects of our satire are murdering us. 4. The human song that is fiction is gravely aware that the earth's song is being extinguished. The writer of fiction must address and defend the intrinsic value of non-human life, independent of human interests. 5. Fiction must energize the word, thwart conventional reaction and expectation, invite a new gnosis, and illuminate a path away from the dead end of the self. I don't recall that my little audience was terribly moved by my humble list. No revolution happened that night. I hadn't made my point with the words I'd chosen. Maybe they were the wrong words. Maybe they were the right words, but they didn't take flight. Using that tired phrase, I think of the photo I'd seen of a great ox skeleton in the Museum of Natural History in New York. The skeleton is dramatically attentively posed before 3 large, spotted great auk eggs. So creepy and cruel, right? The great auk was flightless, and even by bird standards, innocent, and the last pair were killed on their nests, bludgeoned into extinction in 1844. The great auk is said to be a good de-extinction candidate, and some people are excited about this resurrection biology business. But it's hard to know what sort of environment it could be restored to, humankind having destroyed everything's habitat pretty much everywhere. And there were so many complex and astounding ones, quite irreplaceable. No way to revive and restore so much, even if we wanted to. The poet Philip Larkin saw death as a ship, a black-sailed unfamiliar, towing at her back a huge and birdless silence. A birdless silence, all too common now. The rule, actually, rather than the exception. In the past 50 years, the global population of wild animals has declined 74%. Bird numbers have decreased by 40%. Such decimation is catastrophic and irreversible given our habits. The birdless silence is upon us, and we are one with it in its wake. We are living with extinction quite comfortably, it seems, so far. In 1959, Peter Matheson wrote his devastating history, Wildlife in America, chronicling our country's determined slaughter, bringing to our attention in clear, calm prose our annihilation of the wild. 3 years later, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring appeared, the 2 books ushering in a change of thinking, a metanoia about our relationship with nature, the living, non-human world. Or at least nature is what we used to call the leafy, unconstructed, undeveloped, sort of mysterious, non-human world, before we changed it to environment, a word more tech, more cold, with less of a romantic, metaphysical vibe. Our metanoia, however, proved to be a fragile thing, quashed by a vast persuasion machine that managed to assure us, excuse me, that undiminished consumerism, which is fun and a human right, could coexist with a healthy planet. That is, if you were so niche, you actually believed that a healthy planet was really all that necessary for human flourishing. It's a new dawn today, and it's all ours. You practically have to be a mystic to perceive it in the confident and reverent way of the Kentucky monk Thomas Merton. He spoke of the day's first moments. The first chirps of the waking day's birds mark the point vierge of the dawn under a sky as yet without real life, a moment of awe and inexpressible innocence when the Father in perfect silence opens their eyes. They begin to speak to him, not with fluent song, but with an awakening question that is their dawn state, their state at the point vierge. Their condition asks if it is time for them to be. He answers yes. Then they one by one wake up and become birds. They manifest themselves as birds, beginning to sing. This is very beautiful. Awaken and become, a very old idea, a lesson, the one big lesson to which we must abide. The monk vanishes, the birds, even the dawn, only the song is. But when the song is extinguished, we have come to the end. The death of nature quickly followed the death of God. Not a wolf's whisker, a spider's thread separated the two. Yet in terms of death, only one could be deemed real, as inactual, though which one is indeterminable, as they are the same. Samuel Beckett quite famously said that given the ghastliness of our situation, we can't go on, but we must go on. And he said that then, years ago. He was raised an Anglican, a process that went considerably awry, but became agnostic. He had fun being an agnostic, I think, but still claimed that he didn't have a day when he felt his work went well. He abhorred explicitness. He felt that music was the highest art form, as it was never condemned to such a stricture. Of course, God, about as non-explicit as one can get, is everywhere in Beckett's work. The great writer and metaphysicist George Steiner argues in his book Real Presences that great art can't be created in the absence of God, the absence of wonder and transcendence, that any coherent account of the capacity of human speech to communicate meaning and feeling is underwritten by the assumption of God's presence. This would be news to the literary marketplace, news neither welcome or meaningful for a formula that has pretty much been established for palatable fiction, palatable commercial fiction, which the Brit Crit Will Self refers to as recursive quilting, a repetitive patchwork, a thin amalgamate of faded scraps. There is a sameness to our fictions, don't you think? Humans, having kicked everything else out of this earthly nest, have doubled down on fascination with itself. The human is the subject of our greatest concern. The nest is emptied. It's just us. Excellent. But we still require so much. Attention, of course, and justification, but sympathy most of all. And this is what fiction, in its current form, a form of recursive quilting, tries ever more desperately to provide. Our fictions, our novels, our literature have become trivial, acquiescent, febrile, and sentimental as well. It seems to be what most people will tolerate. For we shouldn't be forced to tolerate the intolerable, right? Though of course we do. We do it all the time. We are in a crisis of extinguishment. It is not a future we await or fear or hope to avoid. It is a now. And fiction is standing down. The novel, which has long been considered a commanding presence in our lives, long accorded the respect and status of a necessary art, particularly when her most acclaimed practitioners were embracing and affirming our humanity, and the onslaught of our inhumanity is backing off. Just like us, her heretofore reliably entertaining subjects from the demands of epical change. The blank page we have scribbled on so muddily and merrily has, despite our efforts, become even blanker. Before we could figure out what it meant to be human, we sort of decided it really doesn't matter. Our literature is quite unprepared for this. Having dealt with humans busying themselves with their peccadillos and dreams and savageries so ardently and exclusively for so long, the arts have failed to make the pivot to engage a world in which human pleasures and confusions and marital discords have become irrelevant. We'd heard the whinings and whimperings that we were merely part of a fragile whole, that the worth of non-human life was independent of human exploitive interests, but we never wanted to share, not really. We didn't like this idea of interconnectedness with the earth. It disempowered us. Our literature tagged along with this attitude. We would endure, we would overcome. The social contract was between us and us alone, not between us and the enormous, inhuman, complex consciousness of Earth. Literature proceeded as if such a contract was valid. It began to depend overmuch on facade and lost its grip on our attention. It lost the step. It addled on, the same old story, tricked up a bit motley. It was no longer bringing the news because the news was too alarming. The hyperobjects, as the philosopher Timothy Morton would call the brutal disorderings of climate change, were too massive for the usual contemplations. Literature tried to be supportive and positive, but it was not supportive and positive enough. It could even seem a little uncertain, a little submissive in the great, gaping face of it all. So we turned to tech, doubled down on tech. Technology would get us out of this jam and awe and entertain us while doing so. We may not know now how we can continue to grow and prosper and satisfy the shareholders while continuing to blow up the planet, but we will later, when technology gets even better, faster. It may not make sense now, but it will later. Tech will figure things out, make things right, a different kind of right. We feel a little overwhelmed at present. Tech doesn't feel overwhelmed. It doesn't feel sorrow or guilt. Why would we want our technology to feel guilt? It's disruptive enough that some of us feel guilt, twinges of guilt, at having caused this ecological cataclysm, the effects of which are both grotesquely obvious and beyond our comprehension. Guilt is something we very much do not want to dabble in. Guilt makes us feel bad. It's not the human way. But it can be transformative, an agent of change, leading us, perhaps shoving us down new paths of being and thinking. Being in the world is considerably different than thinking about the world, as writing is different from reading. Though sometimes writers struggling with their work like to believe that reading is kind of like writing, part of writing, writing's assistant and accelerant. Thinking can be a leisurely pursuit of speculation, whereas being is a spooky space, unfamiliar, momentously others. Thinking and being, powerful opposites, which could be compared to the cataphatic and the apophatic in Christian epistemology, the positive versus the negative way, the employment of words and images versus the silence of the ineffable. Both are powerful ways of seeking connection, completeness. A writer's way is seemingly the cataphatic, but she could not proceed without a deep awareness of the silence between and beneath the words, an apophatic silence, fulsome, of an ordinary reception, antithetical to the birdless silence humankind has wrought, a silence of elimination, of exhaustion. None of the arts can commune with the second silence. Concerning the first, literature, with its dependence on words, seems the least likely to successfully engage with it, and most likely to be accused of inadequacy of response to crisis and loss. Words, they surround and assault us. They're the speed lane to cognitive dissonance, to disillusionment, perhaps because of their inherent hypocrisy, their susceptibility to the Orwellian magic trick of raw reversal. Or perhaps because we've reduced most language to mere gregariousness, a cloak for our numbing secularism, a tool for the marketplace. Technology has made much of what consumes our lives beyond the reach of verbal articulation. There is code, there is data, there is the tyranny of the algorithm, there is meme, there is an X that can mean anything, another product we can consume. We are being consumed by consumption. Technology is closing the window on us as individual. It's closing the window on us as aggregate. The window on what, you might ask? The window on being, on becoming integrated with the world rather than its assailant. Maybe we only fancied for a while that there was a window, should be a window. Or maybe there is very much a window, but tech prefers to toss it out in a fire sale, a drought sale, a dead ocean sale, a shoot it or use it before it's gone sale. Technology is a way of thinking about the world, of perceiving it only as the raw materials of production. It is a way of thinking that ultimately cannot sustain itself, a thought a nihilistic, a thought that reveals nothing because it does not speak in the language of revelation. Literature, however, can and must speak that language. It has been all too willing to accommodate and record when it should resist and awaken, to mirror and assure when it should enchant and transmute. Literature must demand much of us, our keenest and most attentive selves, and we should demand much of it. We must address the world beyond our crude manipulation of it and become receptive to being addressed in turn. This is the vital correspondence that literature must renew, that our fictions must shapeshift into being. And may I suggest, somewhat wildly perhaps in these despairing times, that of all the forms literature can take, it is the short story most prepared to offer the crucial metanoia that will awaken us and take us on our last migration. The short story, misconstrued, misutilized, its puzzling effects dismissed, its very name a misnomer, which never suited its gifts. The short story has always been something of a secret agent, a medium between the accessible and the hidden that can connect us, not to meaning, a human construct at best, but to instructions into higher levels of discoverable comprehensions. The short story deals in subtleties, in true effect. How exhilarating to sense that beneath the facade of a story, which is always thornily transducing, are more necessary revelations. How exhilarating to believe that this protean form can fashion paths away from stifling anthropocentrism and destruction into new consciousness. But perhaps we are no longer bold enough to allow this dark and wolfish form, the short story, to challenge and transform us. The world was too ravishing for our crude wants, and we are here only as revenants, here to realize the extent of our misunderstanding. We will not return again. Thank you. I paperclip. Sure.
We have time for a couple of questions. I have a mic. Is it? So just wait for me to come with the mic so it gets picked up by the camera. Anyone have a question?
That's okay. Oh, no.
Hi, thank you for reading to us today. This is a process question. When
no.
I thought about when I was reading your stories, I wonder how you know when a story is done. Your stories end when others are just getting started, and this kind of recursive sentimental fiction that you've been talking about goes on, and you stop. And how do you know when it's time to stop?
Well, it's not exhaustion with a story, but I think it's one feels that one has accomplished what everyone set out to do, and then it ends sort of naturally. It's, I mean, I don't have a method of endings. I don't know if that answers your question. Process and craft. I once did an essay on craft, just comparing it to a plate of, cheese, blocks of little cheese or something. It's something I sort of, I guess because I can't explain why I do what I do, I can't really explain what a story should do. Thank you.
So I found you through, sorry, I'm a little nervous, but you wrote the introduction to a photography monograph that I picked up a few years ago for an artist named Curran Hadelberg.
Yes, yeah.
Whose work I enjoy very much. And I was wondering if, because you seem to write about photography very well, and a lot of people have drawn a connection between photographs, sort of like Curran takes fine art photographs, and the short story. And I was wondering if you feel like, I don't know, there's a connection between the two, because there are two forms that I like the most. Yeah.
Haven't there been books sort of written on, a short story writers looking at a photograph and then trying to write a story? Have you ever seen these? Am I imagining this? No. And I don't think that's a good idea somehow, because the photograph has its own mystery, and the story somehow using the photograph as a prompt. But maybe I'm totally wrong on this. Maybe that's a wonderful prompt for something very special,
Thank you so much for being here. I had a question. I really like your rules for a short story that you wrote about the story must have a clear surface with much disturbance below, and that list of, I think it's 8 things.
What is that?
You have this famous list. It's like 8 rules for a short story. Yes, and how it's different from a novel. And I meant to ask.
Where is that list? I don't have it.
It's somewhere, but number 2 says the story must have an anagogical level. And I'm very embarrassed to ask this question in a room full of very smart people, but could you explain what an anagogical level is,
Yes,
especially in a short story?
Well, the level beneath whatever you think the story is about. I mean, I think Eric almost mentioned this, that it's what there's got to be a secret river under it. I mean, maybe the writer, me, isn't even aware of it, but that's what I'm always trying to find, is the secret river that flows underneath the ordinariness of the action that is illuminating. I guess that's what I meant about number 2. But I think what was number 7 or 8, something, you have to have a dog in every story, right?
An animal within to give its blessing.
An animal,
Yeah.
to give its blessing, right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time for another couple of questions, a question or two, if anyone.
Thank you so much for the reading and for the talk. I wonder, because in the beginning you say that narrative has been captured or made to serve the ends of capitalism, of a certain kind of financialized techno-thinking, and I wonder what exactly you imagine the irreducible core or seed of narrative to be. There are certain ideas about what narrative is somehow deep down, whether causality given form or an interpretive counter with an event. And so I wonder if you think narrative is always necessarily human or anthropocentric, if there's a way to imagine narrative as something other than putting the human in relation to something else.
That is such a beautiful Berkeley question. See, this is why I'm so thrilled and terrified of being here. Oh, how does one, well, make the shift from our anthropocentric selves to a new way of narrative? I mean, yeah. Well, trial and error, I guess. You've got to just, I was sort of trying, I mean, I don't know what I was doing when I was doing Azrael and the Devil, but I was trying to use that very short form to explode in different ways. And I can't do this again, you know, you're always trying to do something different. But I think the times will demand a different way of approaching a narrative, and you've just got to experiment and fiddle around and be bold and be brave. Sorry, I didn't probably. That was a wonderful question.
I was really struck by your use of the phrase "our numbing secularism," and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you're thinking about that and the way that maybe we've lost our belief in something, and the way you were talking about God and nature being kind of like the same thing. I'm just wondering if you can talk about that in relation to the form of the short story and how the short story might disrupt this kind of numbing secularism that we found ourselves in.
How the short story could confront the
how the short story form disrupts the numbing secularism that we've kind of found ourselves stuck in.
I'm sorry, could you? Maybe I'm not hearing it correctly, but just how the short story can
disrupt. Yes.
Our expectations of it?
Of secularism.
Well, do you agree that fiction tries to make us feel better or comfort us in some way?
Not always.
Not always. Well, we want more of that. I think it's just the short story to me. It's swift. It's mysterious. It just has a lot more power, I think, than longer pieces to disorient you and to bring you into different other ways of looking at things, I think, than the novel.
Thank you.
Maybe one more question, if there is one more?
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks. I appreciate it.